I'm Adrienne Enns, and I welcome you to the Intention Sessions podcast. I want to inspire our most intentional living. In each episode, we'll talk to remarkable individuals who will share their authentic journeys and their insights with us. They're going to remind us that life's complexities can be our greatest teachers, and that intentional living can be expressed in an infinite number of ways. I hope you find some inspiration for your most intentional life right here. Today on the podcast, we have Julie Thayer. Julie is a passionate and very accomplished student and teacher of yoga. She has studied extensively with the world's best teachers, and her studies have seen her explore many niche areas, including alignment, chronic pain, depression and anxiety, and yoga nidra. And these are just to skim the surface. And speaking of skimming surfaces, stand-up paddleboard yoga is also a passion of hers. Now, I met Julie a few months ago, and why I'm so grateful to have her here to talk to us is for this reason. So we were collaborating on a project that someone else was organizing, and we came to this table, and Julie, felt like I knew you when we sat down, and then we were to introduce ourselves, and we all just took this deep dive introduction. So I shared about my work in the world, but also that it came through my struggle with addiction. And we just had this incredible introduction, and just reminded me of being in the corporate world where nothing like that would have ever happened. So Julie's story just really struck me, and we're gonna dive in there. But for any listeners, I do want to let you or advise you of a trigger warning. We are going to talk about suicide in this episode, so I want you to know that from the outset. But Julie, I just want to welcome you.
Thank you, Adrienne. You're giving me the shivers and the chills because recalling the first time we met sitting around that table, not only with each other, but these other extraordinary women. And like you said, we just dove in all together into this really incredible conversation. And I literally just remember you and I sitting across from the table because we were sort of the first two to arrive, and it just being this incredible instantaneous connection and resonance. And so I felt very much the same way, and I'm so grateful. In some ways I laugh because I think our worlds are very overlapped, and I'm like, how come it took us so long to find each other? And yet here we arrived at this boardroom table, and finally our paths have crossed, and I too am just so grateful for that.
I know. I remember you talking, and I want you to share your story. But as you were talking, I just felt this feeling deep inside me, like I know her,
Yeah.
And it was just like whether we've known each other in another lifetime or whatever the circumstance, but also your story just resonated with me so deeply because I was like, I know this story. And as we were just saying before we hopped on, we're going to talk about struggle and life's like hurdles is major understatement, but how we navigate these things and why we talk about them now so we can heal. But when you were talking that day, it just struck me so deeply because I didn't hear these kinds of things when I was struggling. And I'm sure many people listening may have the same experience. So yeah, like if somebody is checking you out on social media right now, they're going to see this beautiful, radiant woman who's very accomplished, doing all this amazing yoga and inspiring us. But I want you to share, where that healing journey really came from.
Well, interestingly enough, and thank you, Adrienne, for hearing my story that day and receiving it and resonating with it, and and as I've come to know you and have a greater understanding of your path as well, it is no wonder that we are vibrating together so beautifully. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because the story starts really early on in my life when I realized, you know, basically in my teen years that I understand now that I would have been struggling deeply with depression. And things were just different for me. I was a very heavy feeler, definitely an empath, to the nth degree. And I just absorbed everything around me, felt everything around me, and it was extremely overwhelming. And I was able to intuitively understand that there was a point of difference for me there, and that I needed to understand how to manage that aspect of myself. And it was, it also came with eating disorders throughout my teen years. And it was really when my eating disorder kind of got to this critical point where I sought help for myself. I actually sought counselors on my own. I didn't share what I was going through with anybody, not my parents or family or friends. I just knew something wasn't quite right. And I sought out counseling for myself through my family doctors. And proceeded to get counseling to resolve the eating disorders. And I worked really hard at that for a good 3 or 4 years, until eventually in my early 20s, I was able to really, for all intents and purposes, heal from the eating disorder and find some uh, equanimity for myself in that regard. However, what continued to sort of rise up for me were these overwhelming feelings of sadness, of responding again to what others were moving through in their lives, holding that energy, and so on, and having to understand how can I be present for others and take care of others, but ensure that I'm not doing so at the expense of myself. And that was a really difficult thing for me to do. So in actuality, my first suicide attempt was when I was 19 years of age, and and I always understood, like I always thought, okay, this is really challenging because I'm a capable human being. I'd always done extremely well academically in school. I was an athlete, um, and and a successful athlete, a basketball player, a volleyball player. And you sort of alluded to it earlier, is from the outside looking in. For all intents and purposes, I look like this human being that had the world by the balls, so to speak.
Yeah.
But inside, I was a mess. And I was known in high school as the girl that smiled a lot, because I was so introverted and so incredibly shy. I didn't want people to think I was a snob. So I would just smile at everybody all the time. And the only time where I really felt like I could be myself and I was confident and so on was when I was on a basketball court, on a volleyball court, or high jumping. Those were the three things that I did. And I could arrive there and have like a competency about myself. Outside of that, socially, I was so incredibly shy, that like I would eat lunch in my math room, like because I couldn't imagine going to sit in the cafeteria. And I went to a very large high school that had like 3,500 to 4,000 students. So it took me a long time before I found that comfort in being able to go and actually eat lunch in the cafeteria. So, I'm very much an empath. I am an introvert, although that surprises a lot of people, that I am. But in actuality, if you catch me talking about the things I'm passionate about, case in point, our conversation right now, I am like, blah, 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 blah. But outside of that, I am extremely shy. And so that combined with sort of this tendency, and my understanding is there's definitely some genetic influence there, likely, as others in my family have struggled with depression in the past. So I understood this about myself, and I kept continuing to seek help and assistance. I'm like, I see this person that has capacity. I want to show up in my life. I want to be of service. I want to make my difference in the world. I am capable. And then there's this other side of me that is like antithetical, and really deeply struggling. So I continued to see these counselors for many, many years. And it was not until I would say, when I turned 32, where I kind of moved through all of that and stood up and was like, okay, I feel whole. I feel, and I hate to use the word normal, because what is that? So I use the word equanimity a lot, where I feel that I have an equanimity in my life. I have the capacity to meet the ebb and flow of life, the good stuff, the great stuff, and the really challenging stuff, the traumatic stuff, with a degree of calm and ease and equanimity, versus it when it's a traumatic event or a challenge, pulling the carpet out from under you and falling to pieces. So that capacity to go with the flow of life, the ebb and flow of life, it's guaranteed that we're going to have the goodness. It's guaranteed that we're going to have the challenge, the grief, the loss. It's just part of the ride and the journey. So equanimity, living in that space of equanimity, allows us to meet that with grace and an ease and a capacity. So for me, that is really how I define my state of well-being and how I check in with myself, sort of in that daily inventory. So I did a lot of the work. And this, you're like speaking to somebody who honestly did not think she was going to live past her 30th birthday. I just thought, this world is not for me. I don't know how to function and be and breathe in this world. And it is going to kill me. And, um, but I continued to tenaciously pursue well-being and wholeness, when I could and when I felt I had the capacity. So by the age of 32, life really shifted for me. I ended up getting like this incredible job, this job of my dreams that I never even imagined. There was a time I didn't think I'd be able to hold down a full-time job in my life. I didn't think I was going to be a mother. I really didn't think I was going to experience life, in its fullness, and that I didn't have the capacity to meet it and experience the good, the bad, and the ugly of life. And all of that work, all those layers of work over the course of years, finally came to this, intersecting point where I finally stepped up and into myself, and felt this peace, this equanimity, this capacity. And it was reflected in the job that, I secured for myself. Again, not that, for me, it wasn't really the money that I was making. I was making the most money I'd ever made in my life. It was career. I was working corporately, and senior executive, and life began to gel. I got married a year and a half later. I had my son Ollie, and I really stepped into life. And I felt that the depression was, I always had to be aware of it. I always have, I spent basically, you know, 15 years of my life developing tools and resources, to draw upon to support myself and this tendency I would have to fall into deep depression and like literally immobilized. And so all those tools, those resources were now available to me. So things like, I knew I needed to exercise. So, exercise has always been a part of my life. So I was very fortunate. I didn't have to carve out new routines. That's just something I've always done. And I'm really grateful for that. Nourishment, how I feed myself. I generally don't drink. I'm a teetotaler for sure. Every once in a while, I really savor and enjoy a glass of red wine. But really for me, and just who I am, and just my way of being in the world, it's just not a good fit for me. And I'm pretty sure that if I went too far with that, I'm one of those people that could have an addiction to alcohol.
Yeah, I don't
So
recommend it.
no, yeah, like I think, like for me, I just realized, like, I'm like, you know what, this probably isn't a good idea for me to do,
Yeah.
because there's just, there's been times, I take medication, so obviously the contraindications with that, and just awareness. And you know what, it's not something I really miss. Again, I'm very fortunate. Every once in a while, I have my little glass of red wine. It takes me 5 hours to drink it if I finish it,
Yeah,
but
I don't
that's it.
understand people like you.
I know it can be very confusing for some. They're like, "What do you mean you don't like beer? What do you mean you don't like this?" And I'm like, "I know, but it's just,
It's amazing.
yeah, and we're all different, right?
Yeah.
So, and obviously my challenge was elsewhere, right? My
Yes. Yes.
vulnerability, my difficulties existed elsewhere. So, and in recognizing as, I moved through the process and came to understand myself, I was able to make some very definitive choices about lifestyle, which have served me extremely well. So, again, what I choose to eat, how I fuel my body, I ensure I get enough sleep every night. Like I am definitely your 8 hours of sleep girl. If I start to compromise that, I can unravel very quickly. So all of those things, the exercise, yoga, and yoga ended up, obviously morphing into a very big deal for me, and is really where I have um, found sort of the ultimate tool for myself to heal and to thrive, not just survive but thrive. And we can talk a little bit more about yoga
I do
and
want to
sort of
talk about yoga. Yes.
oh yes, because yoga is just it's just such a gift. And it took me a little bit of time to find yoga, because I was a more is more kind of girl. Like, again, coming from an athletic background, I did not comprehend less is more. Everything was more about strength training, harder, faster, stronger. In terms of work wise, work related, everything was about drive and pushing and everything else. So I mean, I laughed the first time I did yoga. um I remember having this moment where I'm like, yeah, I don't get this. And it was probably maybe 3 years later, and I kept feeling compelled to come back to the mat. There was something that kept drawing me there. And I thought, no, so 3 years later, I tried it again, and I was still like, yep, I don't get it. And then eventually I did a class. It was my sort of first group class because the vast majority of yoga I'd done to date, I sort of did in my living room to Rodney Yee tapes and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. And then finally, I did this class, and I remember laying in the shavasana, and the tears were just streaming, which is a very common experience for many people who discover the magic of yoga and the deeper connection that comes with it. And that was a real turning point for me. So I'm going to digress a little bit before we
Yeah,
dive
we're
back
gonna
into
jump
yoga.
back onto the other track, but yes, we'll come
Yeah.
back to yoga because yeah, it's so healing. So
Yeah. And I think what I wish to do is sort of, lay the foundation that, this experience of depression for me has been a lifelong journey,
mhm.
and in some cases, battle. And so I wanted to frame it to understand that this started a long time ago. And then I got to the, magic age of 32, and life suddenly bloomed. Like it bloomed. And I stepped into this place of equanimity with myself. And that, Adrienne, probably lasted, I'm going to say, 12 years. Like I didn't have a speed wobble. I had been through some really challenging, difficult, traumatic times. I had had a business. I'd had to declare a bankruptcy in the business. For all intents and purposes, I had to rebuild, and I did that, and I inspired a new business, and I started a yoga studio, and there were all sorts of events, and I won't go into them all, that would have been, for all intents and purposes, very challenging had I been struggling with depression. And yet I had this capacity now to meet it, to draw upon the resources I had. I literally was known as the girl with the pink colored glasses. Like you didn't know how to figure something out, you came to Julie, because I would figure it out. Like I could just see the possibility in everything. And some would say that those pink colored glasses were like a little too fuchsia sometimes, but generally speaking, I was a solution maker. Like I could look at a situation, varieties of situations, and I could find the good, the positive. I could create, I could inspire, and redirect things. And that was who I was. And it
Yeah.
didn't occur to me that I was anybody different anymore, because and the depression, although I was always cognizant, and I would say to myself, okay, remain humble to that experience, because you need to take care of yourself. You need to sleep, you need to eat well, you need to keep moving, you need to exercise, you need to nurture and nourish that part of yourself to minimize any vulnerability that's there. Because if you've struggled, and you step into a place of what I'm going to call recovery or equanimity, there's this little voice in the back of your head. I don't know if you can relate to this, but that
I
says,
relate to absolutely every single thing you said except for high jumping.
except for the high jumping. That's right. That's pretty specific, high
I
jumping.
usually ran right into the
Oh,
bar, but
I just
other
happen
than
to have,
that, you
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I just happen to have a really bendy back, so it worked for me. But I, I think the thing is that you have this little voice in the back of your head that says, "What if? What if it comes back? What
I'm
if?"
very mindful of that every single day because I'm
Yes.
even now looking at like the lines outside the LCBO and all this,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And I'm
Yeah.
always like, yeah, for me, I could just, it's different and the same, but
Yeah.
my equanimity could be lost in a heartbeat.
Yes. And it's something that it requires literally daily diligence.
Yes.
It's daily diligence. It is a daily practice. And it's a daily practice in mindfulness, of choice, of resilience. It really is. And so, whilst I was moving through this period of extended equanimity in my life, although there was, still that little voice in the back of my head, I'd moved, I'd moved away from that to a great degree and very much trusted in the current experience. And I thought, okay, I'm healed, I'm cured, all is well.
Hmm.
And then and so now we sort of fast track to the fall of 2017. And there was all sorts of things that were dynamics at play in my life at that time, that now that I look back in hindsight, I can see the trajectory of each of these things literally hurtling towards one another until eventually they intersected and my life imploded as I knew it on every level:
Hmm.
relationship levels, work life levels, dream levels, like,
I know.
everything, like it just collapsed.
Yeah.
And I thought, and this was in September 2017, and there was this sort of critical moment where it became very clear, that life had imploded. And I thought, and so for the first kind of, I'm going to say 4 to 6 weeks following that momentous occasion, I remember thinking, okay, I got this. I've navigated tough stuff like this over the last, 10 to 12 years. I got this. I've got it. And I kept kind of going at it, and I kept kind of battling. And then about 6 weeks after that, I had this moment, and there all I can say is there was no middle ground for me. It went from literally feeling like life was awesome and happening and so on, to complete and utter collapse. So it was literally like falling into darkness, and it was just so fast and furious. Like there was nothing at that point, there was nothing I could do for myself because I went from light to darkness so quickly, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense.
And there's no other way I know how
And
to
no
describe
sense.
it.
You know,
And
like
no
I
sense.
understand it, but it
Yes.
is hard to, for I think for our rational mind to make, we always want all these steps, right? And it just doesn't make logical sense. Steps don't always work like that.
No, and you don't, and so sometimes, and a lot of times in hindsight, people will, a wonderful, kind, supportive people will say, "Why talked? You could have talked to us. You could have asked for help." But it was so hard and fast that there was no window where I could. It was like the light was snuffed out instantaneously. And all the equanimity, the peace that I'd felt for 10 to 12 years was immediately washed away. And I was left sitting in this extremely dark place. And in November, on November 30th of 2017, which was my birthday, I attempted suicide. And I was very, very serious about my attempt. And I oftentimes, when I reflect back on my earlier years, my, sort of my late teen years and mid 20s, where I'd had, two attempts, I would qualify those as what is often talked to about being as cries for help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on November 30th, 2017, it was not a cry for help. I was done. And um, and it was a one of those situations where the day the day was kind of much like no other. I woke up, I made lunch for my son to take to school that day. um, I was teaching a yoga class at Yoga Source in Newmarket, where I loved teaching, and it was a beautiful community. uh, and but it was I had sort of been anticipating my birthday all week long, and I was like, I don't want to have my birthday. I'm not worthy of a birthday. I don't deserve it. Um, and it, for whatever reason, it became this sort of, benchmark for me, for lack of better terminology, and it was looming. And I'm like, I don't deserve a birthday. I don't deserve to be celebrated. In fact, I would literally be doing everybody a favor if I just checked out. And for those of you that are listening, I'm going to say this immediately following that statement, is if that is ever going through your mind, remind yourself to the very best of your ability in that moment that that is not true. It is not a truth. And oftentimes, when you're in that negotiation with yourself, and at that point, at that place, we have a great capacity to convince ourselves that it is a truth and that the rest of the world is going to be better off without us. That is so not true. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. And if you ever find yourself in that place and you need to reach out and seek a reminder, please message me and I will remind you, because it's so, so important. And I, um, I sort of, I took my son to school. My husband went off to work. I, um, I went and I had a pretty much a breakdown on the way to teach at the studio. I had to pull off the side of the road, and I was sobbing, and I was just a wreck. And I'd called the studio to give them a heads up, I'm coming, but I'm a bit of a mess. And but I showed up, and Teresa, um, who of course owns a yoga studio and is a dear friend, was just incredible when I got there. And and it was such an incredible community that even as we went in, she's like, everybody, Julie's having a really shitty day. And I all in my mind, Adrian, I'm thinking, how in the hell am I going to teach this class? Like, I am, like, my
Yeah.
eyes are swollen, I am a wreck. um, and somehow I got on my mat and started the class in tears. And it was a very full class. As it turned out, everybody came out to help me celebrate my birthday. And I ended up leading the class, and class ended up, just unfolding as it does, and doing what a class does, and being very special. And they celebrated me in the birthday chair, and I'm sitting on T's feet, and she's throwing me up in the air, and I'm just smiling like all is well. And we, after that, Teresa and I went and had we went to Starbucks and had a little coffee, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I lied. I said, "Yeah, I'm great. I'm just fine."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yep, I'm sure." Perfect opportunity to reach out, to ask for help. But it was so where I was. Like I said, not a glimmer of light was present for me any longer. And the plan was in motion. And I had put everything into the car that I needed. And I actually picked my son up from school, and I dropped my son off at home. And as I dropped him off at home, I said, "Tell dad mom's just going out to get some cream." And he looked at me kind of funny, and I said, "Yeah, I'm going to zip out and go get some cream." And on the way home, in the car, and I say this to him all the time. Like, I say to him, "You are like the greatest gift, and I'm so proud of you and of the person you are and your kindness." And so on the way home in the car from school, I was articulating that to him, which I do often. And so I drop him off. I say, "Tell dad I'm just going to get some cream." And I left, and I literally went to go die in the woods. And fortunately, two things happened. Ollie heard something different in my voice that day.
Yeah, they're very perceptive.
Yeah, and thank goodness, because he, after a little bit of time of being home, and dad was like, "Well, mom was just going to get cream." And Ollie said, "Well," and I guess he had said, I found out afterwards, is he said, "Yeah, dad, she just went to go get cream, but she sounded funny. She sounded funny." I didn't, I didn't think I'd translated anything differently than I normally do, but he picked up on it. And as you said, they're so
And of
intuitive.
course he did, right? Like,
Yes.
just even hearing you describe this, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so he did, and that point is what mobilized my husband um to start to do something. And I had turned he had been able to figure out where the car was, but at that point, I'd turned my phone off, so there was no way of sort of understanding where I was in proximity to the vehicle. So that was a challenge, and they'd called the police. And the other thing that I was very fortunate with, it was really horrible weather. It was end of November. It was cold. It was rainy. It was that slow, like rainy, sleety, gross. And there was very little. They couldn't take a helicopter out because there was no visibility. So the option is that they would send a police dog. But the police dog was going to take 45 minutes to get on location from Oshawa. So, and again, now I can say this with great gratitude, is the dog found me in time.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate in that regard. I can tell you, when I was found, I was very ambivalent. Um, and uh, had sort of, was all I could sort of think in my mind was, well, it won't be today. And so there
Mhm.
was no real sense of euphoria in being discovered, because I was really committed to the outcome.
Yeah.
And I say that only for reference, because obviously you and I are sitting here today having this conversation, and I am in a very different place.
Mhm.
And I think that what is important about that is that, regardless of how far you fall, how dark it gets, provided you are not successful in your attempt, life is going to get better. And you will find your way. and you will feel joy again, and you will feel that equanimity again. And that, I feel, is why it's so important, and why I feel it's so important now to share the story. Because for those that struggle, for those that get to that place, and not everybody understands that place. We are all unique in the way we move, breathe, and be in the world. And our energies are different. Our genetics are different. So regardless of where we feel depression comes from, and I feel it is all of those things. They all interplay when it comes to understanding our mental health and depression and anxiety and PTSD and all of those, manifestations of mental health. But for those that haven't necessarily been in that dark place, it's really easy to say, well, I don't understand how you could make that choice to take your life. Things that we often hear. It's a selfish decision. Well, I will tell you, from my standpoint, when I was negotiating with myself and reasoning the decision out, and I use that word very loosely, I really, truly believed that the people in my life would be better off without the complication of Julie. And that, in fact, I perceived it as a very selfless act. And I know that that is, again, a very, that is confusing, because I think so oftentimes we have heard that in the past, that if somebody makes that decision to take their life, that it is a selfish decision. And I disagree with that statement. And yeah, go ahead, Adrienne.
I was just going to say, I appreciate you sharing this because, yes, for somebody who doesn't understand it, will they understand it? We don't know. Will they be
Yeah.
open to understanding it? We hope so.
Yeah.
But I think the most important person that this message lands with is the person who is headed into that dark place or is in there, because I echo your sentiments completely. I was in that place right before I entered rehab. And I was
Yeah.
like, I needed, that
Yes.
was my light because I knew I
Yes.
needed help. I was
Yes.
not, I
Yeah.
couldn't do it on my own. And it is very dark and you just feel, I felt alone and ashamed, and I
Yes.
really didn't believe that people could help me. So when
Yeah.
I actually got help, I was
Yes.
so surprised. And to your point, like life goes on and it can get better. And it sounds ludicrous at the
Yeah.
time, but
It
little by
sounds impossible. Like literally, when you're in that point, it feels and sounds impossible. You
Mhm.
convince yourself of that.
And so how did you, like, if we're to use our next like chunk of time
Yes.
together, like, and I don't want to skip over anything, but
No.
how did you, from that place to where you are today, like, how did you make that leap and what practices do sustain you? So for somebody
Mm.
listening, if they're just
Yeah.
going to do like one small thing today or one small thing tomorrow,
Yeah.
I know this is like 5 or 15 questions in one, but
Yeah.
can you take us in that direction?
Absolutely. So I think for myself, obviously, I was hospitalized for a period of time and did the work with, I have a psychiatrist as part of my healthcare team. I have nurses, social workers. I literally had a community of support. and not to mention the presence of other patients that were in the hospital at the same time as I am. And you realize very quickly when I went into the hospital, again, mental health, depression, anxiety, the manifestations of mental health illness is, really levels the playing field. It affects us all across all demographics and so on. And I will tell you that some of the most incredible people I have met, the greatest sources of inspiration for me to move forward and heal, came from my fellow patients and the team of support that I was gifted at the hospital. And so I think it's really, really important, if you are in that place, to seek out professional support, um, whatever that's going to look like and feel like for you. But it's really, really important to construct and create a team around you that is going to support your healing, your recovery journey, your growth journey. And so I would definitely recommend that, and just recognize that, do your due diligence with that. You might not connect with the first psychiatrist you have or social worker. There might not be a resonance or an energy there that feels right or that feels like it's serving you well. And that's okay. That happens when I teach yoga. Not everybody shows up and does one of my yoga class and goes, "That's the best thing I've ever done." And the next person will message me and say, "That's the best class I've ever done." And you think, okay. So don't give up on support because it doesn't feel like it's quite the right fit. Leave no stone unturned is what I always say. Like, if it doesn't feel right, then you know what? Find another. And until you find that fit that feels right for you. And I've been very fortunate. My psychiatrist is absolutely incredible and has been instrumental in my healing and recovery. But I've had psychiatrists in the past that I didn't fit with, that weren't resonance, and I stepped away from that because of that reason. So the other thing is that, there's a lot of discussion around, of course, being a yogi, about meds. I do take meds. I have been very fortunate. I've tried lots of meds that were very deconstructive for me, and would exacerbate certain symptoms or have horrendous side effects, and they weren't the right fit for me, and I would come off of that. But there was still some sort of chemical imbalance that was existing there, that I was battling. So I finally found a med that works brilliantly for me. Interestingly enough, having been through everything I've been through, I am now, I continue to take meds, but I am on the lowest dose of the med I've ever been on in my entire life. And I credit that to the fact that the med is one of the tools that I utilize to support my whole health and well-being, but I use it in conjunction with the other tools and resources in my self-care toolkit. So again, as a yogi, there were times, like, I've been to events and so on, where people are like, "You shouldn't need to be on your meds. You do yoga, you eat well, you sleep well." Yes, I do all the things. I do all the things. Like, there is not a whole lot more I could do to nourish my whole health and well-being. And I still need to utilize a medication. And that's okay. You need to do what feels right for you.
I
So,
absolutely. I'm just gonna
yeah.
always put an extra period at the end of
Yes.
your sentences
Yes.
because I agree. Like, it's all
Yeah.
so personal. In your comment about the medical professionals too, we need like an independent third
Yes.
party
Yeah.
who is experienced, and friends and family are incredible, but they're also
Yes.
emotionally attached to the
Yes.
situation and the outcome. So to have those professionals on your side. And also, I loved what you said too about,
Mm.
I know I had to make some decisions early on, and we're fragile, right? We're second guessing
Yes.
ourselves, and yet there's this knowing, of
Yeah.
who's right for you and who's wrong for you. So listening to that knowing, but also allowing these professionals to also make you uncomfortable, because often you
Yes.
need to be uncomfortable to do the work you need to do to
And
break
it's
through.
gonna be darn uncomfortable. There are going to be
Yeah.
some excruciating moments of looking in the mirror and having to sort of dive deep into yourself, and not the pretty bits. Like, you're going
No.
into the real ugly stuff and figuring out how to make peace with that, how to own it, how to take responsibility for it. And I think you've mentioned family and friends, and I think this is a really important point, is for those that are supporting those of us with mental health challenges, all that you don't need to show up to fix. And I think that is a really important discernment, because oftentimes, if we are the support person, we feel, because we're kind and caring and loving and we want what's best for our loved one, we want to show up and fix it. All that we can do as that support person is show up and be present and listen and hold space kindly, compassionately, patiently, and lovingly. Nothing
Yes.
more, nothing less. Because at the end of the day, and this isn't about fixing, we're not fixing ourselves. We're growing and we're evolving. We are healing from trauma that we've experienced in our lives, deep hurts, deep grief, deep loss that makes us feel like we've been shattered in a gazillion bajillion pieces. The opportunity then presents itself to begin to reform, to reconstruct, and to grow again into a whole being, a, a a more optimal version of yourself. And
I was
unless
just thinking of that word
yeah,
wholeness as you were talking,
wholeness.
right? Because the fixing implies there's something, we may not like
Yes.
it, but there's nothing wrong. But what are we going to do with this, right? Like hugging in all of those pieces of ourselves and like, we're all going to do this together.
Yes. And I remember thinking, like, at one point, I remember I wrote a blog about it, how I felt like there were like a gazillion, bazillion, trillion pieces of Julie scattered everywhere. And as I started to move through that growth process and healing process, it literally felt like I was picking some of these little small, teeny tiny fragments up and trying to put them back in. And they might, as I put them back in, some of them would fall back out again. And then where I put them back in was actually in a very different place than than where they may have been in the first place. So we take the experience, we have the opportunity to take that trauma, that event, that implosion of our lives. We have then the opportunity to hold the space for ourselves with support, with professional support and assistance, with the support of our loved ones and families who are choosing to show up for us and be present without judgment, simply to hold space, to love you, and to give you the opportunity to do the work that you need to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the work, the growth comes from within. There's
Yes.
no getting around it. No matter,
There is no getting
there
around
is
it.
no getting around it. And
We've
if you,
tried.
we've tried, yes, I know you have tried, and I have tried. I have tried to circumvent that wheel several times. And what I can say with conviction is that what remains unresolved comes back to kick you in the ass, because it demands and commands our attention. And it commands our attention in a variety of ways. It could be in our mental health being compromised. It can present itself as disease in our physical bodies, cancers, heart conditions. Those ailments are also reflections of the vulnerabilities we are experiencing in our lives, our greatest challenges, our greatest where our greatest growth lies. If we're not attending to that, if we're not practicing and we talked about it earlier, this daily practice of, I've sort of summarized it this way: it's this daily practice in awareness, in attentiveness. So, being aware of your whole being and what constitutes your whole being. It's not just your physical body. Your physical body is one component of that. So, attending to your breath, life force energy, attending to your physical body sensation that is present or absent, attending to your mental, emotional well being and health. What are those feelings? What are the qualities of those feelings? What is the quality of the inner dialogue I'm having with myself? What are the words I'm choosing to dialogue with myself and others? And then there's that connection to the broader self, our soulful being, and our role in the broader world, and how it is we can take our gifts and who we are and translate them into being of service to the world. And so if we can attend and be aware, and through that awareness connect more deeply to those levels of being, then we have the opportunity to mindfully, purposefully take action towards wholeness and that sense of equanimity and our capacity to meet the ebb and flow of life, to meet the goodness, to meet the grief, the challenge, the trauma that we are going to experience. It's inevitable. Unless you're living in a hole in the ground, you are going to experience the whole gamut that life has to offer. Our capacity to meet it, to move with it, to flow with it has to do, I feel, with our capacity to attend to our whole being and our whole health and make that a daily practice. And it's daily diligence and doing those daily inventories and check ins and going, okay, what do I need to give myself today? Where are these imbalances? And with the awareness of those imbalances, how can I choose to live today, to breathe today, to be today, to think today, to feel today, to connect, to serve, to how can I do all those things in a way that maintains an equilibrium, that maintains a full bucket, if that makes sense. So we're not creating deficits within ourselves and chasing our tails.
I totally agree. And I would just add to that, like, just that these daily practices, like, it's a constant realignment. But by doing the daily practices, we can get into alignment with more ease. And I only say that because I know with
Yeah.
the intention work, a lot of people are like, okay, good. So if I do this for X amount of time, like, I'm going to be there. And I'm like, like, there's
Yes,
no end point, like it's
that's
not
it.
like life is all of a sudden perfect, but we, to your point, can meet life from this very healthier, whole, clearer place.
Yeah, and a place of capacity, a place of being able to trust ourselves that we can do this, right? And the trust comes from knowing that we have given the best we can to ourselves in terms of nourishment and self-compassion. And I think that is really ultimately is this idea of self-compassion and being able to recognize that we are all human beings. We all have our vulnerabilities. We all at times feel shame, at times feel we lack confidence and capacity, and that is human nature. But the more we attend to ourselves and are honest with ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror and kind of do that honest evaluation and a- again, the more purpose we have, and we can move forward with a greater degree of mindfulness and intention, like true intention, because we've given ourselves that opportunity to gain clarity, not because we're bulldozing through life and we're not taking time and we're just moving from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing without taking a single breath. And like sometimes I'll just say to my clients, like, honestly, sometimes if all you did was breathe today, that's enough. Sometimes that is enough. We don't need to be on this hamster wheel of life, running ourselves into complete and utter exhaustion. And I think for myself, we kind of go back to sort of the tools, there's a couple of other things that I highly encourage. Again, yoga, and you alluded to this, Adrian, is that oftentimes traditionally in North America we think about yoga occurring on your yoga mat, and yes, it does occur on the yoga mat, but yoga occurs off the mat in real life. The real yoga,
Yes.
um, the real yoga occurs off the mat, and it is applied and experienced within the context of your life. That is the true magic of yoga. The movement in yoga is one aspect. It's a beautiful aspect. I love the movement in yoga. It fills me up, but it's all the other aspects of yoga. The wholeness of yoga is where the magic lies as we take it off of our mats and we begin to practice it daily with intention in our daily lives. And for me, I will tell you, without a doubt, it has saved my life. Yoga has saved my life. And it has just because it is the one of the few things that exists in the world that addresses the whole being. And that's where the power lies, in my opinion. And the other thing that I do is I walk. I do a lot of walking, a lot of hiking, a lot of getting outside in nature. That is also a daily practice for me. It's doable, it's accessible, it's free, it gets you outside, it gets you soaking up vitamin D. Um, I did so much walking at the beginning of my growing period. I joke and say I'm pretty sure I've lapped the earth 3 times in that period of time, because it was this place where I could go out. It was very meditative for me. And I literally, when I started the walking, when I got out of the hospital, I was one step at a time. And and I had this little mantra, and it was healing, recovery, healing, recovery, healing, recovery. That was my little mantra at the time. And I was out for an hour, and I recited that the entire time because it was just all I could do at the time. And I continue to walk. It continues to be a huge part of my toolkit, and I highly recommend it when I am working with my clients. Again, because it's accessible and it's not hard on the body. It's not more is more. And it's not that I don't think running is good and other activities are good, but Lord knows we all get a lot of that all the time. Where we have opportunity to slow life down a little is in the less is more activities, and getting more practiced at the mindfulness, at meditation, perhaps at walking, being in nature. Stand up paddleboarding is another one for me in the summertime. That's where, versus the walking, I'll spend a lot more time on my board. But again, not every tool is necessarily going to work for you. It's very personal. But what I suggest is you try them on and you see what fits and feels right for you. And you build your toolkit, your self-care toolkit, so that it is there for you to draw upon daily, and it becomes this daily practice in your life. And there's all sorts of little tricks and tools, again, I suggest when I'm working with my clients, creating islands of calm in your day where you really literally take a moment when in between going from this thing to that thing, where you take a moment, maybe it's sitting in your car, and you create this island of calm, and you take a moment just to go inward and to do a little inventory as you move throughout your day to go, how am I doing? Am I breathing? How do the sensations feel in my body? How do I want to move into this next interaction? I have a choice about how I move into that interaction. And practicing the mindfulness and creating those islands of calm throughout your day can be so, so helpful, and actually empower the next meeting you have, or the next interaction you have, because you've actually stopped and checked in with yourself and thought, how's the day gone so far? Receive the gifts of the day so far. Fill yourself up with that. Acknowledge them, connect to them, be aware of them. And then, then step into the next thing, versus just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing without mindfulness, without care, without receiving, without acknowledging, without feeling gratitude. This opportunity to stop and drop and practice gratitude in your day.
It's so true. I just think it's so beautiful. And we have the time, so
We
just
do.
to allow ourselves the time. And Julie, I just want to thank you
Mm.
so much for
Thank you,
your
Adrian.
rawness, for your vulnerability. You've also provided everyone with lots of practical advice. So if
Mm.
people are struggling, hopefully they're hearing your words and maybe shifting
Yeah,
their actions, and all of the practical tools that you just offered. We're going to put everything up in the show notes so people can
beautiful.
follow you, reach out to
Mm.
you, do
And
yoga
please
with
do.
you,
Yes,
text you if they need you. And
please
is
do.
there anything, like just a few, if we missed anything, is there a few closing words that you want to share?
I think just to reaffirm that each one of us has what we need within us. And we we just need to stop long enough to sit in those places of awareness and attentiveness and connection. And and when we start to do that and we start to recognize that in fact all I need is within me. I I have the capacity to meet this life, but I need to slow down and I need to be mindful and I need to gift myself that time, because in so doing, that's what's going to empower authentic living and real living and rewarding living. And it's going to empower not only the relationship you have with yourself, it's going to empower the relationships you have with those around you. Um, it allows you to maintain a fuller state of being, a sense of wholeness, so that when you go out into the world to be of service, to offer up your magic, and we're all here to do that, to be of service, to offer up and inspire and change the world. We are all here to do that. We all have a place um, in that part of life and living. And the more tuned in we get to that, the more we continue to fill up the bucket and hold ourselves in a whole place to the very best of our ability, we empower capacity. We have far greater capacity to show up and do just that, to work our magic, to be present for others, to hold space for others in struggle, to do so with kindness, compassion, and love and patience. If we're not doing those things, what we tend to find is we're showing up, but we feel resentful. We feel empty. We feel exhausted. We feel tired. And the reason that is because we're giving up so much of ourselves without filling the bucket up first, without ensuring that the love and the kindness, compassion, and patience that we are extending to others, we are extending to ourselves first and foremost. And that is not selfish. It is not narcissistic. It is it is the way that we can make our difference in the world. It is our own integrity of being. And the greater integrity we have with ourselves, the greater clarity we have with ourselves in terms of values and who it is that we are and what our gifts are and how we are going to champion those gifts in the world and be of service. That's what matters most. And so fill up your bucket, do whatever it takes, leave no stone unturned. If you want to reach out to me, if you are in deep struggle and you're feeling alone with that, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach me, you can direct message me via Facebook or Instagram at Julie Thayer Yoga. I would love to hear from you and be present for you. Do not suffer in silence. Nobody needs to suffer in silence. And we are all moving through this life We all have struggle. We all hurt. We all grieve. It is an experience, a common experience. So let's talk about it, and let's stop pretending that it's not happening for any of us, because it is. It happens to us all. So better to be open, to unveil with those that you feel safe with, to take those masks off, and to begin to acknowledge where you're at in your life, and to begin to take ownership of that experience, to hold yourself in the highest esteem and recognize that you are worthy of the goodness that this life has to offer. It doesn't always come easy, but oftentimes the hard work is what unveils the next layer of magic that you're meant to experience in your life. And I can assure you that that has been my experience. And 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, I lost the will to live, and I sit here today and I tell you, I am on fire with what life has to offer up, and I'm excited to continue to navigate the ups and downs and to keep growing. So just keep growing. Baby steps, little baby toe steps.
Baby steps.
Baby
Julie, I
steps.
just thank you. You are a powerhouse. I'm grateful that you're here.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I'm grateful for, your honesty, all the tools, the work you do in the world. And just thank you so much.
Well, it's been an absolute honor, Adrienne, and I'm so grateful I'm here too. Because had anything been different, you and I wouldn't have connected, and you've been one of the magical gifts that have come into my life since that time, and I wouldn't want to miss this for anything. So thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to share so openly, and just for being present in my life and showing up for me as you have. It means the world to me. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. May some of the wisdom shared here inspire your most intentional living. For more information about this episode, this podcast, intentional living, and my work in the world, please visit mayyouknowjoy.com. You can also find my May You Know Joy and Seeds of Intention cards there, and my book, Intentional Days. You'll also find details for the Intentional Days membership, where you can gain access to a thriving community of intentional souls and lots of regular inspiration. I've got you covered. Until next time, I wish you great joy and many intentional days.